before any limit would be put on that. And that would create great reductions in the amount of refuge area available for manatees in one of the few places in the state of Florida where we can actually say the manatee population is doing well.
80% of our booming population lives within 20 miles of the coast. Salt water has intruded at a rate of up to 5 inches per day into coastal aquifers, replacing forever the fresh water we've been pumping out. Now, development is paving over maximum recharge areas for our biggest and best, the Floridan Aquifer. That's not only a spectacularly bad idea, but arguably a violation of our state constitution, according to a former head of Florida's original Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Natural Resources.
When you ask yourself where we came from, where we are, where we're going with our water quality problems, our water shortage problems, and other ancillary environmental problems that we have associated with basically with development and population growth in Florida, you have to go back to the history of Florida and see how we get this mentality of this culture of the development comes first and public interest comes second. When Florida came into the Union about 1849, 500,000 acres, which was known as swamp and overflowed lands, was for the specific purpose of developing the state. And so what we have then was a conflict developing constantly between what's privately owned and what's publicly owned. So this conflict has become more intense as Florida gets more population. Property owners and business people believe that the primary purpose of government is to help development. Article 2, Section 7 of the new Constitution of Florida, adopted in 1968 by the people of Florida, says it shall be the policy of the state of Florida to conserve its natural resources and scenic beauty.
Despite that mandate, aquifer levels have been dropping all over the state. In the Panhandle, water levels in some wells sank from 80 to 240 feet. Around Orlando, groundwater fell 25 feet. In Volusia County, 15 feet. That sounds as if we're overdue to start thinking differently about our water.
There's no question there's a link between water and population. In a county as populous as Miami-Dade County, with 2.5 million residents and counting every day, especially with immigration trends the way that they are, our local governments have to be responsive. They have to come up with solutions that will meet the growing demands of competing water interests. Ultimately, we want to inspire a water ethic, if you will. Just because it's cheap right now doesn't mean in 5 years from now we're not going to be having extraordinary water bills. What kind of population can this county withstand in order to have a water supply that is adequate and that the quality is suitable for drinking and for our healthy ecosystems?
Look at any body of water in Florida and you'll find conflicts of use, conflicts which often affect water quality.
We are concerned. The lake is still in relatively good condition, but what we have heard from others is that once the lake gets to a certain point, the turnaround process is so very, very difficult, and we do not want the lake to get into that kind of a condition. Straight across the lake from where presently I live, was just cleared, and they're going to be putting in a subdivision there. Subdivision was approved quite some years ago, and the lots there are smaller than what would presently be acceptable. But the officials say that because they have already been approved, that's going to be acceptable.
Lake Placid is a popular fishing lake in an area of sandy soils which have historically kept lake water quality high.
I started fishing Lake Placid in 1949, one of the most pristine lakes in the state of Florida, and I fished throughout the state of Florida. A lot of the homes on this lake pull their drinking water, house use water, from that lake. About 2 decades back, the water started turning green. We got the county lakes manager to start taking samples of the water. At the same time, hired a scientist to come in and sample the waters. Their results showed that it was attributable to the dairy on the south side of State Road 70. Their report from the DEP definitely was nowhere near the results that we have from our scientists and from the samples taken by Highlands County.
We do at times run into difficulties with the conflicts of interest between or within the various agencies that regulate water quality, water supply. But Lake Placid was suddenly inundated with very red-colored water, very stained water. We found that there was a fair amount of dairy-related stuff running off in the runoff water going into the lake. That dairy-related runoff had a fairly negative impact on the lake. What that provides is independence from some of the information that's being collected by the other agencies.
But independent agencies often have very different priorities and very different ideas about how to manage our water.
Well, I think I was born an environmentalist because I spent all of my childhood outside. That's when I began to appreciate nature. Then when I came to Florida in 1945, the whole state was a true paradise. I was just amazed at what a beautiful, gorgeous place this was. And I spent the rest of my years watching it go down the tube.
Juanita Green has spent a lot of time as an environmental reporter and a member of various environmental groups focusing on the Everglades, once the largest and still the most famous of Florida's natural areas.
When you look at the whole project that resulted in the drainage of this huge area, it appears that the whole system of government in the South Florida Water Management District is designed mainly just to keep the agricultural area functioning. When you drain a wetland, you have to have some place to put the water that you drain off of it. And that was when they began to drain water from the southern part of Lake Okeechobee into Lake Okeechobee. The Florida Wildlife Federation and some other environmental groups filed a lawsuit to stop the pumping of that dirty water into Lake Okeechobee because it was ruining the fishing. The lake was becoming just a polluted mess. The environmentalists won that lawsuit, so they began to pump the dirty water from the ag fields south into the remaining Everglades. The existence of this drained farmland in the heart of the Everglades is interrupting the entire ecology of the Everglades.
As the scale gets larger, the problems get larger too. Water from the Everglades agricultural area wound up in Florida Bay. Shortly afterward, algal blooms, similar to the red stuff we saw at the Lake Placid Dairy, turned up in the bay.
I spent quite a bit of time looking into the distribution of these algal blooms and determining what the nutrients are, the critical nutrients that are causing these blooms, and where these nutrients may be coming from. I examined various hypotheses such as sewage or nutrients coming from seagrass die-off or from the Gulf of Mexico, and I finally came to the conclusion that the blooms are the result of high phosphorus concentrations from the west meeting high concentrations of nitrogen from the east, and they basically meet in the middle of Florida Bay where the large algal blooms occur. The high phosphorus is a result of phosphorite deposits in Western Bay. These are natural phosphorus deposits that were deposited millions of years ago. Phosphorus alone, however, will not cause an algal bloom. You have to have both nitrogen and phosphorus to generate an algal bloom. Basically, you did not have algal blooms until the nitrogen-rich farm runoff was diverted to the south, eventually into Florida Bay. And you can see this on both an annual basis and on a seasonal basis. We have both a wet season and dry season here in Florida, and basically every wet season when lots more water gets pumped into the bay, you see the development of larger algal blooms. Similarly, on an annual basis, we have wet years and we have dry years, and again the algal blooms get larger during the wet years. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which plans on pumping even more fresh water into Florida Bay, will in fact lead to even larger algal blooms. This is also of concern because ultimately this water ends up traveling south out over our coral reefs, and these coral reefs have been in decline over the past couple of decades and are already in quite poor health, and we suspect there may be an association between these algal blooms and their poor health.
In 1993, we started the Reef Relief Photo Monitoring Program. With this program,